It was the middle of monsoon season and the small village of Bonpur lay surrounded by lush green hills drenched in relentless rain for days. The river that snaked through the valley had turned into a roaring beast churning with muddy water and broken tree branches. The air was thick with the smell of wet soil and the low rumble of thunder seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Arif was only 17, a wiry boy with sun-darkened skin and eyes that carried both the innocence of youth and the weariness of someone who had seen too many struggles. His family had lived in Bonpur for generations, surviving on the little rice and vegetables they could grow in their patch of land. His father had passed away when he was only 10, leaving his mother to shoulder the weight of raising him, and his younger sister Sana. Arif worked odd jobs to keep food on the table, sometimes helping farmers, sometimes carrying loads for traders, walking miles each day barefoot through the slippery roads. On that particular day the rain had been falling non-stop for 2 nights and the riverbanks had begun to overflow. Warnings were shouted from house to house telling people to stay indoors, but Arif was on his way back from delivering a small sack of rice to an old neighbor whose legs no longer worked. The path home ran dangerously close to the river, swollen now into a raging torrent. He could hear the furious rush of the water even over the heavy rain. As he quickened his steps, the current suddenly grew louder, as if something massive had fallen into it, and then over the noise came a desperate cry for help. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the storm. Arif froze, straining to hear again. "Help, someone please help." The voice was a woman's, trembling and filled with fear. Arif sprinted toward the sound, his heart pounding. The path curved, and there in the distance, near the crumbling edge of the muddy bank, he saw her. She was clinging to a half-submerged tree trunk, her long hair plastered to her face by rain and river water. The current was tearing at her, pulling her closer to the drop where the river plunged into jagged rocks below. Her eyes were wide with panic and her lips trembled from the cold. She could not have been from the village. Her clothes, though soaked, were of fine fabric, and her shoes, now gone, must have been expensive. Without thinking, Arif threw himself forward into the water. The cold hit him like knives, but he pushed on, fighting the current, every muscle burning, each step a battle. The mud beneath his feet gave way and he was swept toward her, catching the tree trunk with one hand and grabbing her wrist with the other. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice raw over the roar of the river. She tried to speak, but only water and broken breaths came out. He dug his heels into the muddy ground and pulled with all his strength. The current yanked at them, but he would not let go. Inch by inch he dragged her toward the bank until finally they collapsed together on the wet ground, both gasping for air. The woman shivered violently, coughing up river water. He quickly shrugged off his thin shawl and wrapped it around her, though it did little against the cold. "Come on," he urged, "we have to get away from the river. It's not safe here." She nodded weakly, leaning on him for support as he half carried, half guided her along the slippery path back toward the village. When they reached his small hut, Arif's mother rushed out, her eyes widening at the sight of the drenched stranger. Without hesitation she brought them inside, lit a small fire and made hot tea. The woman barely spoke at first, her voice soft and hesitant. When she finally did introduce herself, she simply said her name was Alina and that she had been traveling to a nearby district when her car got stuck on the flooded road. She had tried to walk for help but was swept away by the river. Arif and his mother gave her dry clothes and a warm meal and let her rest for the night. Sana brought her blankets and sat near her, asking curious questions in her innocent voice about where she lived and what she did. Alina smiled faintly but offered little detail, only that she was grateful for their kindness. The next morning the rain eased, though the river still roared with dangerous force. Alina insisted on leaving, saying she had people looking for her. Arif walked her part of the way until they reached the main road, where a sleek black SUV with tinted windows was parked. A man in a suit jumped out, clearly frantic. "Madam, we have been searching everywhere for you." Alina nodded briefly and turned back to Arif, her gaze steady. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. "You saved my life." Arif shrugged, embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same. She looked at him as though she knew that was not true, then reached into her bag and tried to hand him an envelope. He stepped back, shaking his head. I did not help you for money. She hesitated, then smiled a little, tucking the envelope away, but her eyes stayed on him for a long moment before she got into the car and was driven away. Arif thought that was the end of it. Days turned into weeks and life returned to its simple rhythm. He worked in the fields, fetched water for his mother, and played with Sana by the river, though he always kept a careful distance from its edge. Then one morning a convoy of expensive cars rolled into Bonpur, drawing curious stares from every villager. The doors opened and Alina stepped out, but she was dressed differently now, in elegant clothes with a quiet air of authority. People whispered, recognizing her from news stories. She was Alina Khan, a billionaire businesswoman known across the country for her empire in real estate and technology. She walked straight toward Arif and stopped in front of him, a faint smile on her lips. I wanted to see you again, she said, and this time I am not leaving so quickly. Confused and a little nervous, Arif listened as she explained that she had been thinking about that day by the river every single night. She had everything: money, power, influence, but she had never met anyone who would risk their life for a stranger without expecting anything in return. She asked about his dreams, his life, his family, and when he hesitated, unsure of what to say, she told him firmly, I want to help, not out of pity but because you deserve more than what life has given you so far. From that day things began to change. She arranged for Arif to attend one of the best schools in the nearby city, covering all expenses. She also helped his mother start a small shop so they would have a steady income. At first Arif struggled in the city, feeling out of place among students from wealthy families, but Alina visited often, encouraging him, guiding him, and treating him like the younger brother she never had. Years later he graduated with honors and went on to start his own engineering company dedicated to building affordable housing in rural areas, inspired by his own village and the people he grew up with. Alina remained a constant in his life, not as someone to be repaid but as family bound by the moment. A poor village boy had pulled a woman out of a flash flood without knowing she was a billionaire who would change his life forever.